Compelling stories are not hard to find. You just need to know where to look. Join your host, Dr. Eric Shaw, prosecutor Ryan Frank, writer Adrian Bondenberger, and comedian Ryan Connor as they interview ordinary people about their extraordinary experiences. This is Baggage.
Hi, and welcome to the show tonight. Tonight, our guest is a longtime friend of mine. I've known him for over 20 years. We worked together coming up through the Richmond ambulance system here. He was a professional paramedic with me. He and I have had parallel healthcare careers here. He has gone a little different route than me. He's gone much higher than I have. He is now a flight medic. And I'd like to welcome to the show Eric and give him an opportunity to share his stories. Thank you for being on, Eric.
Hey guys, how's it going?
It's going well. I'm excited about this. So, I got all kinds of questions, but I'm not sure. Eric, and Eric, this is going to be the most confusing episode. Eric, Ryan, and Ryan. Adrian should be fine, but Dr. Eric Shaw, I'm not going to say that again. That's way too professional. Is there questions that you had for him? Because I got like a million. Or do you want to start with like how you got into it? Or?
Yeah, I'd love to hear just kind of a kind of early introduction from where we left off professionally and what got you to where you are today.
I'll go with this. First, thanks for the invite. But I see what you did there with the whole elevation, and I went higher. I see the aviation joke there. That was nice. That was quiet, but it was there. I don't know if it's real though. So and basically, my current job is a flight paramedic. I've been in EMS for over 20 years, like the good doctor was talking about. But what I'm doing now is not an entry level job. This isn't something you just, as a new paramedic, you wind up doing the sort of work. There's just too many sides, too many facets. Just for an idea of what I do, and I'm thinking about the general public's understanding of EMS in the first place, is most people don't know what EMS is or what a paramedic does or what you get when they show up. And that's even worse on the flight side. So if you have a basic understanding of why you call an ambulance, we'll just start with there and elaborate as we need to. But the basis of what we do for most programs in the lower 48 for rotor wing flight, it's HEMS or HAA is one of the other acronyms they use now for helicopter EMS or helicopter ambulance transport, is we do two types of runs. We do scene flights or interfacility flights. So the scene flights are ones where someone's called 911 for whatever reason. Someone's sick, heart attack, strokes, maybe a car crash, whichever thing has happened. And for whatever reason, that local jurisdiction either is not able to maintain the care that the patient needs and or they're far enough away from a receiving facility where a ground transport isn't going to be effective. You need to shorten that time. So that's one of our focuses. And the other area is what we call an interfacility transport. So those are the times mostly at outer-lying facilities where, for whichever reason the patient's presented with, that staff, that hospital, their capabilities are exhausted and they need to be moved maybe for pediatric specialties or cardiac specialties or trauma specialties. So they want to decrease the amount of time that patient is outside of the hospital. So the helicopter covers that. And they want to be able to maintain the level of care that they have started. So most local ground EMS may not be able to support the level of care that's been started to get that patient to a larger university type setting. So that's where we come in.
What do you mean by that? Is they can basically provide, for all intents and purposes, ICU level care on the move. And most ground ambulances don't have those capabilities.
Correct. Or the staffing or the training or even the equipment. So that's kind of where we step in.
And my mind's going in a million different directions because
go for it.
People that have listened to the podcast, I was a helicopter crew chief in the Marine Corps, and I'm thinking just weight and space wise, if you have that kind of can deal with that kind of trauma in the helicopter, how much are you? You got to be working in confined spaces. Is that part of it? Trying to figure out how to make the best use of what you have in the helicopter?
Yes and no. What airframe were you in?
I was in 46s, so medium lift, decent amount of size on the inside.
Yeah, you got all kind. You could your ship could eat our ship. Ours are pretty small, so if you saw maybe the Kiowas, kind of the small of the 206, 407s, that's a popular airframe.
That's super tiny.
Or an EC-135. It's a twin engine ship, but still square footage wise, there's not a whole lot of space. So yeah, we're always challenged with size, loading capabilities. The pilots are constantly doing the numbers for fuel, for how much fuel we may need to burn to actually accept the size of the patient. I don't know if you've looked at healthcare lately, but we're getting bigger in this country, which doesn't help for flying. So for sure, it's logistics are strong in this business.
So I'm assuming two pilots. You're in two pilots in the front. You're in the back. Is anybody else typically with you in the back, or is it just you?
Two pilots would be phenomenal. We don't do that here in these United States. It's single pilot.
No way.
Absolutely. There's a lot of places overseas that have moved to a two pilot system, but the common makeup of a crew here in the lower 48 is usually a single pilot and a nurse medic configuration. And since you're familiar with aviation stuff, yes, we'll do single pilot IFR as well.
That's instrument flight rating. Not, I would say, I don't know percentage wise, but most pilots are not IFR qualified, certainly civilian pilots. You are in the military. I'm assuming if you're a medevac pilot, you probably are too. But if it is instrument rating, then like if it's fog or whatever the reason, you can't physically see where to land. You have to be rated, and so that you can use your instruments to navigate. And that makes sense because if there's an emergency, doesn't matter if it's fog, doesn't matter if it's rain, you got to go in and out, right?
Correct. And an overwhelming majority of our flights are VFR, so visual flight rules, versus the IFR side. We do have the capability. A lot of that may be for recovery of the crew back to an airport, but we do some IFR missions as well. But, we were talking about being able to do that with experience. We're fairly conservative on those missions as well. So we don't push the limits or anything like that, for some of the reasons that you spoke of. One of the other things you brought up was the background. Yeah, most of our pilots do have a military aviation history. Not all of them. We're starting to get more civilian pilots, but an overwhelming majority do have the military history because you get so many hours, and it's very expensive to go to flight school as a civilian, and even more so to get the hours in a helicopter, and even more so to get the hours to do the type of job that EMS requires.
I imagine flight experience, if you have somebody getting out of the military, because the way it works is if you're a pilot in the military, you're besides the Army with they'll do some warrant officers, but usually you're a commissioned officer. And if you're going to get a flight program, then you're guaranteed a contract. You're probably doing 4+ years, maybe more. And to do that, you're going to be in the aircraft a lot. And you're going to get a lot of hours. So people coming out of the military usually have a pretty decent amount of hours because they've done a longer commission than most officers in order to because the military has paid for you to go to flight school and all that. They're going to get something out of you. So you have people coming out of the military being flight medic helicopter pilots. That makes sense. They got a lot of experience. Now, the number of hours you need to graduate as a civilian has got to be hundreds. If that.
It's a lot. And our standard is, I believe it's about 2,000 hours is what we look for. So civilian or military, doesn't matter. You have to have those hours. And it may be 1,500. I may have that wrong, but it's still a significant amount of hours actually flying the aircraft.
Even 1,000, actually over 1,000 hours as a civilian is kind of even more impressive.
Correct.
Because you're trying to find the time, the fuel to fly that often. And I I still know, I'm still friends with a bunch of pilots that have been or are medevac pilots from my squadron. And I've heard several times them saying that the scariest, most stressful they have been far and away is medevac missions in the civilian side versus anything they had to do overseas or in training in the military. Because in the military, you can set the parameters. We're going to do this training, and most of your hours are not going to be in combat. They're going to be in stateside peacetime, and you have choices. We're not going to push it. We're going to set up parameters for training that is safe, so we can train our pilots and get all that. But if there's a car accident on an interstate and you got to land near some power lines at night, that's you push that more, right? Is that fair to say? You would find yourself in trickier situations?
Well, some you could, but if you push that, that's really a fault of the crew entirely. We have some similar parameters that we work with as well. There's kind of a phrase or a chant, if you will, a 3 to go, 1 to say no. So at any point during the mission, if we say, I don't like it, doesn't look right, smell right, feel right, we can cancel, no questions asked, no harm, no foul, I'm not going to get fired. Now, if I do that on every job, I'm probably going to have some questions from my manager about why I don't want to work today. But in general, we have some safe practices as well. And the minimums that we fly under are fairly conservative. So we don't fly, on the treetops at low vis anyways. So our VFR minimums are pretty workable. But you bring up a good point about, let's say interstate landings and power lines. It's one of the things that we do like about getting some military pilots is they have time at night under goggles landing in improvised or unimproved locations. So a lot of your civilian pilots may not have that. It's an area that they have to train up and get better at, because while they may have the hours, they may not have that exposure. To get hours, sometimes a lot of civilian pilots will do things like do tours. So they'll get a lot of hours just flying tour groups around. Or oil rigs is another popular one because there's a lot of flying around oil rigs. So they can get the hours and get paid to get the hours, but they may not get some of the specifics that you would get in aviation in the military.
All right, I'm going to set a timer where I'm not allowed to talk for about 5 minutes because I just got 30 more questions.
You're like geeking out like I did when we had the virologist on.
I am. I got a bunch of questions.
Well, aren't you in charge of editing? So
that's true, but I'm also responsible for making sure people don't turn off the podcast with just me nerding out about.
Well, no, 90% of our listeners are helicopter mechanics, so this is perfect.
Exactly.
But just, to kind of like reinforce, that it can be dangerous even on the state side. When I started medical school, a girl in the class above me was a flight medic out of DC. And this was right when they were doing kind of the expansion and repairs for the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. And her helicopter clipped one of the cranes and the whole crew was killed. It crashed into the river there. So
yeah,
it takes good pilots.
It is an extremely dangerous job. So, speaking towards, the acceptance of missions, we have a lot of leeway to say no if it's not right. And there's a lot of things in place and in practice that if we follow those guidelines, we're typically safe. But there's some things you can't see. It's very difficult to see wires at night under goggles across a field with no lights. If it's very dark, NVGs don't work so well. So it's extremely difficult to see. I've been in a few situations where the local fire department in charge of the landing zone did a great job. They thought they were checking all the boxes, but what they didn't do was look up into the middle of the LZ and see that there was a cable line, just, like your little cable for your TV that someone had stretched through the trees. Couldn't see it until we were about 20 feet from it. The pilot noticed it. It became a non-issue, but it was definitely one of those things that you couldn't account for.
What?
Yeah. So if you could, go ahead. Sorry, I broke my own rule. Go ahead, Adrian.
You're on the clock.
Sorry.
Yeah. What are some of the most maybe memorably challenging experiences that you've been a part of, either in terms of like it was really out there, like stretching the capacity of the flight, or maybe it was the terrain was no good, or maybe the situation was really dicey, stuff that jumps out in your memory as being challenging or hard?
It may be challenging at first, but once you learn the system and how to work through it, it becomes a bit less challenging. For instance, like maybe the terrain or the area that's chosen for us to rendezvous with EMS it could be better, right? You have a few choices there, and if you're doing what you should do as a crew member that's paying attention, we should be looking out along the way and coming up with other plans. So we should be constantly thinking about the next step, the next plan. If this fails, then what are we going to do next? And one of those things is coming up with secondary locations to land. And it just requires slowing down, slow is smooth, smooth is fast, slow down, find a better place to land, communicate with the people on the ground, and move. Instead of trying to push a limit that no one is comfortable with, why don't we just come up with a better idea? So those are some challenges. Of course, there's plenty of complex patients that I've been involved with that prove challenging. We can get into some of those at some point, but it's one of those things that I think that the more you're in it, the more you get the experience to making those on the fly improvised decisions that are backed up with safe practices that you just kind of work through it, man.
The thing that amazes me about your job is you're dealing with all the crazy high intensity medical stress stuff that we do, but you're doing it in the air on a helicopter packed into like the back. And like, I hate flying anyways. And I've flown on helicopters before and I don't really enjoy that either. That's a really weird feeling if you're not used to it. And just all that combined with all the other stressful stuff that you're doing is just mind boggling to me.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask is doctoring on land just like really fucking easy for you now?
I actually had more issues when I was still in the 911 side, and this was just with motion. I had issues with lateral motion and getting sick. And when I started flying, I really don't have any issues in flight that become distracting for the job. But when it comes to the medical side, like you're talking about, we take all that stuff that the hospital can't handle, for instance. And I'm not talking down about the hospital. It's just for whatever reason, that patient needs to move. Maybe they don't have the ability to fix the heart attack, whatever it is. We take all that and then we shove it in this machine that likes to defy physics, and then we take it somewhere else. So yeah, there's some distractors there.
As in, like, you're focused, like when I imagine it's one of those things that you're in it. When the patient's on board, you're doing your thing. How much of the outside world is really affecting your ability to concentrate?
So it depends. There's certain phases of flight. I'm sure you remember some of this from your time in that, we are eyes out and we're paying attention if we're lifting or if there's other traffic in the area. The pilot in the front right seat can only see but so far. So if we have traffic coming up at 7:00, whoever's in the left seat needs to be looking around to clear that traffic. So it's not all patient care. And that's one of the positives of having both of us in the back is we can kind of triage what we're doing. And if we can get, if my eyes are going to be off the patient, I'm letting my partner know, hey, I'm eyes out. And I'm looking for that aircraft that the pilot may not have seen, but knows is in the area, and we need to make contact with and make sure they're not doing something like turning towards us. So it's constant. It is stressful because those flights, you're doing the medical side, you're doing the aviation side, you're doing a communication side with talking to the hospitals or EMS or your own communication center. It's taxing. We may only do 2 or 3 flights a day, but those 2 or 3 flights in a 24-hour shift can take 8, 10, 12 hours, depending on your charting, and you're exhausted at the end of it.
So I want to come back to the flight medic stuff because that's definitely like the premise of the show. But can you walk me through kind of from where we left off at Richmond Ambulance to how you got to be a flight medic? Because I think there was some stuff in between there. Like I remember you went through the fire academy, if I remember right, and you did that for a while. How did you get pick up the story from when I left Richmond?
Sure. So we met and we had many adventures, and then we did other things. So I wound up going into the fire department, and that's its own thing. A lot of the flight medics that get into this either have some busy 911 experience, maybe just as a medic, or a lot of that you get in the fire department. Unfortunately, in EMS, it's difficult to make money as a medic, and one of the better ways to do it is in the fire department. I mean, you get a great schedule, you get decent pay, benefits are great, there's retirement, there's some job tracks outside of EMS. So a lot of people go that route, and that was it's one of the ways I went. And life just kind of speeds up at some point. You wind up doing a lot of calls. A lot of them I'll probably never remember. And you build your experience. You make connections. You take some other classes along the way that can help build it. And unfortunately, sometimes these jobs are, your experience, your certifications, timing, who it winds up being a mixed bag of things that actually get you to the interview and then subsequently to be hired. Because you can imagine just with some of the things that we talked about, you might be the highest performing provider, which that's not me. But you also have to have the ability to work with somebody for a long period of time in a highly intense scenario with the ability to communicate and, for lack of a better term, improvise, and then come back in a couple of days and do it again and again and again. So, there's a personality side of it that's fairly important in the industry as well. So somehow I checked the boxes to get into that. Typically it's 3 to 5 years is kind of the minimum standard for EMS providers, for paramedics to even be able to apply for the job. A lot of times what we get are the people that are in the 5, 10, 15 years experience range, because it has to be automatic. So some of the things that you do all the time as a medic in the field has to be automatic, because when you get into aviation, your brain is going to be split a bunch of different ways. You have an entire new job to learn with being in the aircraft to assist the pilot, like we were talking about. And then there's increasing your level of care to the critical care level, like Eric was talking about at the beginning, because a lot of those transports don't happen if you're on the 911 side and you're not already exposed to critical care, or you're working in a hospital where you're exposed to it, which doesn't always happen.
I got a quick question sort of following up on that, which is, do you end up seeing more of a certain type of call due to the nature of the asset? Like you're not being called if it's I'm feeling tingling in my chest, right? You're being called if it's X, Y, or Z, if it's pretty serious. Or maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're not wrong. We do typically, we are tasked for the higher acuity calls for sure. So thinking the strokes, heart attacks, there's congenital issues, pediatrics, traumas, things like that. Yeah, that's typically more of what we see. And I don't mean to sound like I'm downplaying it, but there's even a range of acuity on those. So sometimes it's a lower acuity. It still needs to be checked out in a timely fashion. But not everything is exhausting all of our abilities all the time. So, and when you're on the ambulance in a 911 system, one of the things we used to say was, 90% of the calls we're doing are not emergencies. I don't know if I would say that in this job, but I would say that an overwhelming number of times the transports that we're doing are not exhausting all of the resources that we can provide. We do certainly have those flights in those instances, but it's not all the time, which is probably good, because if you were surrounded by that all the time, your career would probably be very short.
Yeah, that's what I'm picturing. I'm picturing if you're a flight medic, it's like the worst of the worst, and almost all they're all like traffic accidents. That's what I picture in my mind.
We do plenty of those, absolutely. And a lot of those areas, they're further out. A lot of places will strategically position the ships further out from the larger hospitals on purpose, so you're closer to those callers, so you can be on scene faster. And even that's I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. That's what you're going to do. You're going to take them and move them to that larger facility.
But how long is a typical transport?
It's going to depend on the area of the country that you're in. And the area that I'm in on the East Coast, a lot of ours are around the 30-minute mark. Some are shorter, around 15, sometimes up to 45. We have a flight range of about a 2-hour-ish radius. That's with a full tank of gas. And that's going to change depending on if we know an estimated weight of the patient or if there's anyone else going with us. So that's a variable that always changes.
So on the way to a pickup, you've got information about the patient so that you're prepared. And as soon as they get in, you're going to work immediately until you're touching ground on the other side, pretty much?
Pretty much.
That's
especially
amazing.
On the higher acuity ones. There are some that are lower acuity that require a little less work. And we do get some transports where maybe we're moving someone to a different facility and they need to not be outside of the hospital for a long period of time. But we're moving them maybe because an event happened in one area and they need to be closer to home. So those situations occur as well. Those are nice. Those are easy flights. We like those.
So one thing I want to clarify, just from a kind of broader logistical medical look at this, is the way the hospital systems tend to work is they tend to funnel into kind of major metropolitan areas and like academic centers where these are going to be like your level 1 trauma centers and the hospitals that have like all of the subspecialists. So you have like the neurosurgeons, the trauma surgeons, the cardiothoracic surgeons, all that sort of stuff there. And so if you live in like rural Virginia, you may have a community hospital that may be able to stabilize you if you had a heart attack, but they can't do the cardiac cath to save you. Or the two examples that I have where I've used a flight medic, one was in residency, and it was a kid that was going into, had RSV and had a very rare complication of it where he got endocarditis, where it infected the outside of his heart, and he was going into heart failure. And where I did my training, we didn't have ECMO capabilities. That's where you can kind of shift the blood out around the heart and lungs, oxygenate it, and send it back. but Charlottesville, UVA did. And so we flew the patient from Norfolk to Charlottesville. And then here in Denver, I worked at a community hospital in Thornton, and we had a kid that ruptured his stomach and esophagus after a surgery, and we didn't have pediatric surgery there. And he probably wasn't going to make it even with a ambulance ride. And so we had the helicopter come and pick him up and take him to the larger children's hospital. So it's like it's a way to like escalate care quickly.
I've got a follow-up for you actually then, Eric, which is Eric, normal host Eric, not Eric guest Eric, which is up in when both times when I was in Afghanistan, but especially my first deployment, we were way up in the mountains, and we actually didn't have Kiowas in part because I guess they said they just couldn't fly all the time. Like the air just got too thin for them to carry the load they needed. Are there parts of the US, are there parts in general where like that influences flight capabilities and rescue capabilities?
I don't know the physics of helicopter stuff well enough, but I would say I don't think so. I think they compensate for it with different types of ships. Because when I've been skiing before, they'll shut down the top of the mountain sometimes and bring a helicopter in to land people. Like I've got videos on my phone of people being picked up in helicopters from Keystone. And I just met a gentleman today that works for the charity that does the flight lifts in the mountain regions. I'm going to reach out to them. So hopefully we can maybe pull some guests there. So like they definitely do it. I think it's just a different animal.
It's also different airframes are going to be more appropriate to use and have more power to deal with that. When you get to a higher elevation, it can be more of an issue. So you may not see that little Kyle, which is, like a 206. It's a smaller aircraft. You might see more of the larger ones doing those missions.
Yeah, just from my limited knowledge, I wasn't a pilot, but aircrew for what we dealt with, thousands of feet, and it's not really that big of an issue. Where I had to look this up, but Denver's, up there, that's 5,000 feet, but still not really a problem as far as lift and aviation for helicopters. I don't think there's any major metropolitan area, at least in the United States, that really reaches the type of elevation where aviation becomes a problem. In Afghanistan, you'll have areas around 10,000 feet or so. So that's starting to get into, you really probably should be on oxygen if you're going to fly at that height for extended periods of time. So because the air is thinner, there weren't a lot of 46s in Afghanistan because of the height issue, the elevation issue.
There's people using oxygen at 10,000 feet.
I believe so. I think 10,000 is kind of like
if it's abrupt or something.
I guess if you're going from sea level to that might be. Yeah. I was like, I hang out at 10,000 feet and do crazy shit like skiing and hunting all the time. I will say 10,000 feet is
brag,
that.
But, she's so tough.
No. But I will say 10,000 feet is that, for me, is that magic number where things start to not work right. And even if you're in good shape, like once you get above 10,000 feet, like everything's harder. Everything's much, much harder. Even just walking up a hill, doing anything. So
I don't think we've made it through an episode without making a reference to an 80s movie, but here we go again. An Officer and a Gentleman, where they're going through flight training and they become hypoxic, where they're not given a bunch of oxygen and they're acting kind of goofy or whatever. That's real. That's what they do. And so flight training in Pensacola, we had to go through that, and that you're in this chamber and they slowly bring down the amount of oxygen in the room. And they'll say, like, play cards, you guys play some cards. And you're like, I'm fine. I'm great. You're in there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, longer and longer. And they're like, all right, do like more complex thing, like now tie your shoe and do these things. And you would have people that the point of it is you don't know when you're hypoxic, when you start when you're not getting enough oxygen. It can happen so gradually. And I remember one of the guys in the class was like, are you doing good? Yeah, good. Okay. Because your face is very blue right now and everyone else has dropped out. and he's like, yeah, I'm good. And I'm like, okay. Just give us the word when you're not okay. And he says, okay, just spell your name for us then. Yeah, I'm good. Sure, I'm okay. All right, count to 10. Absolutely, I'm okay. Yeah, I'm good. So he just kept repeating the same thing. But in his mind, he was like, I'm having a full-on conversation with this instructor. And they were like, yeah, we're going to call it and start bringing the oxygen back up. So the whole point of that is, yes, Eric, if you're not used to it, if you're not like a Sherpa or something like that, then if you're not used to thin air, then it can be a problem. But again, I don't think they reach those heights in the United States where it's a problem. I mean, flight medic, Eric, you would know better than me. I don't know of any area.
Not for the jobs that we're doing. No.
Yeah, you're never on oxygen or anything like that. You're never doing that kind of.
No, we're in a helicopter. There are other programs, the fixed wings programs that can pressurize the cabin and they can go, do whatever they want to do.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking that because my memory of Denver is you land in the Denver metro area. That's a mile up, right? It's 5,200 feet or whatever. And then you look around and there's a bunch of mountains. So intuitively, I'm not looking at a map or anything, but there are higher mountains there in the Rockies.
There's people that will come just to Denver and get altitude sickness and like within 24 hours don't feel well just being in Denver. And whenever I have people come out to visit, I always tell people spend at least one night in Denver. Don't go right in the mountains. You will absolutely get sick if you go from sea level up to like most of the ski resorts are like 8,000 or 9,000 feet. That's a big jump. And then you're skiing at anywhere from like 10 to 12,000 feet.
I mean, that's why the Broncos have more endurance than any NFL team because they practice in lower oxygen.
Yep. They are awesome. They also, they have to have special baseballs for the Rockies because the balls fly so much further here. It's harder. They make the balls harder to hit out of the stadium.
The things I'm learning today.
Yeah. You're not learning that shit on Seth Rogen. I'll tell you that right now.
Nope.
Or not Seth Rogen. What's that fucking shithead's name? Joe Rogan. Yeah.
That would have been the perfect, by the way, that's such a great fact. Like that could easily be a lie. I'm not saying that's a lie, but like if I heard that in any other context, I'd be like, that's not true.
Yeah.
That's false. But I know that's not something that Eric would make up. So it's true. But normally that would be a lie.
Well, let me ask you this, Eric. What are some of the crazier places that you have had to land? Have there any? Because when I'm envisioning when you're on a call, it's not the military where it's like, hey, that LZ, that landing zone for that practice landing, I can't tell if there's something there or not. There's no stakes whatsoever, so let's wave off. It's got to be in the crew's mind. There's some high stakes here. Generally what the trauma might be that somebody's called you in to get somebody out of there. Tell me about that judgment call and some of the more precarious landings that you guys have you decided to do.
For sure. And it's definitely an unknown. And the process is to try and alleviate as many unknowns as you can. And some of that is technology and some of that is just the process. So yes, if we, for instance, I'll walk you through it. If we get asked to do a flight, we're told kind of a heading and distance, and that's it, nothing else. And the mentality there is so the pilot can make an objective decision. They tell them, this is how far you need to go in this direction, and can you do it or not? Do you have the weather? Does everything look okay? That way they're not making a decision going, oh, it's a bus load full of kids or something like that. There's the pressure is, can you do the flight or not? And if you do the flight, you accept the mission and the wheels start moving there. Then you get a little more detail about, okay, you're going to this location for this type of incident. You'll get some GPS coordinates and you kind of take off from there. So one of the things that we have now, the pilots all have iPads. And if we're in the front seat sitting left with the pilot, one of the things we can do is bring up the coordinates and actually kind of do some recon before we ever get there and know what we're getting into. So if the coordinates chosen by whoever's calling us, typically the rescue squad or the fire department, and we don't like it, it doesn't look good, we have the option to move and say, hey, we're not going to go there. We're going to go, follow the road you're on 2 miles west. There's a church parking lot. We're going to land there. So we have a lot of ability to not get into those situations. But one of the best things that we can do is slow down like we were talking about before. And if we don't feel like we could see well, if we're doing high and low level recons and we can't quite make out if there's anything across the road or across the LZ, then no, we wave off and we do something else. The industry is not safe. I mean, even look back the past few years, there's been a lot of changes to the industry to try and make it safer. Look, they had a crash yesterday, a 206, I think in Kentucky. So it's unfortunately it's too common. I don't know any details about it. I just know that it happened. So I don't know anything else beyond that. But it happens so common that we really slow down and step back and try not to get in those situations. For the answer, what's probably one of the coolest places I've landed, a dirt bike track that they had to stop the race and we landed in the middle of it. And, we had a former Army pilot that got to call out the dust cloud approaching up from the rear as we were coming in, which he hadn't done that since he was in Iraq. So he was kind of happy to do something old school again. Not as exciting answer as you want, but we really try to take the risk out of it. There's been too many incidents in the past.
Well, I would definitely prefer everybody taking it a safer route than coming up with a good story.
But it's easy. You know, there's stories where, you know, you land on a 2-lane in a single direction highway in our area. Well, there's trees lining it all the way, so it's easy to potentially get in a situation where you come in and the rotor wash pushes the trees to the side, and you land. And there have been ships that have almost trapped themselves because now, with no more rotor wash pushing the trees away, the trees are over the rotor disc and you can't lift out. So you have to have some forethought and not, you know, kind of get that tunnel vision and just go, oh, look, the trees are away, we can land here. Well, can you? Maybe you should have done a high level recon before you do the low. You know, I'm armchair quarterbacking now, but you know, that's just kind of the mentality that we do is we slow way down.
Eric, not to steal your thunder, but Ryan, you told me a story once about your helicopter landing on some power lines in Iraq and like flying back to the base with like several hundred yards of cable hanging off. Can you tell that story?
I don't know if I've told it on the podcast or not yet, but yeah, it was probably the craziest one. We were in Iraq, and when you were talking about going in and the power lines issue, Eric, is I was thinking about that exact mission. We were in, I think it was a combat troop insert into Ramadi. We had intelligence that they had the SA-16s, which are the ones that there's really no defense. If the bad guy shoots that at you, that's it, you're done. There's no defense to that. So it was we were kind of on edge, and we had to take the recon guys in. I was the lead aircraft, crew chief on lead aircraft. So many things from that mission. Our -2, my wingman, on the extract was coming down, and his back rotor blades clipped power lines that we didn't see until the last minute. Big sparks. They never even knew they hit it. It burned the rotor blades. They never knew they hit it. But luckily, they were far enough over it. They hit it on the backside, so it didn't take out the rotors. But that was also in the same mission. So we're coming into land to drop the troops off, and it is probably maybe, thinking back, I remember it being maybe 10 to 15 feet clearance past the rotor blades, with walls on all four sides that are as tall as the helicopter. They're above the rotor blades when we're on the ground. So it's a pretty tight. We had to basically go over and then come down. And we were short final. We're over top. And the pilot's like, are we clear to come down? We're probably 20 feet off the ground. Got the recon guys in the back. Now, the bad guys are in the house right next to us. Secrets out that we're there, and we know they're armed. He starts coming down, and at the last second, I see a line going right diagonally across the bottom of the aircraft. And it's pretty low to the ground. I can't see what it's connected to, but I mean, we were pretty committed at that point where I didn't even know if we could have waved off. I said, come on down. So we come down and we just press on this cable and push it to the ground, put the ramp down, not all the way, because the cable's keeping it from going down all the way. And the recon guys jump off as quick as they can. We take off. And as we pull out, we're, I don't know, not even 100 yards away out of the zone. And the explosion of them blowing the wall to get into the house. It was that kind of like fast-paced stuff. They got all the bad guys and no casualties or anything like that. So it was a flawless mission. But as we're flying to refuel, because we're going to refuel and then come and pick those guys up, as we're flying to refuel, tell the aerial gunner, the AO on the other side, on the left side, hey, take a look at the wheel mounts, the main mounts, and see if there's anything on there, because we came down on a cable and I don't know what angle we came up on. And he said, all right, I'll take a look. It was dark. He was like, there might be something. I'm not sure. So let's just air taxi over the runway when we're getting fuel. And he's like, yeah, there's air taxi the whole way. We're definitely dragging something. And when we finally put down, it's like, whatever it is, get it off the wheel. And he comes in and he's just dragging this cable in, and more and more and more. And it was about 150 feet of cable we just ripped out from whatever was attached to. I think it was communications cable, it looked like, probably improvised Iraqi communication cable or something. Somebody lost internet that day. I don't know. But yeah, that was we all took a little snippet of that as a souvenir and a reminder of just, this is at night. It's night vision goggles. The best night vision goggles on the planet cannot see a 1/2-inch cable from 5 feet away. Like you can't do it in really dark conditions. I know they've gotten a lot better, but still you're looking at the power lines. You look at the poles that they're attached to. You're not looking for the lines, because if you see, one pole here and one pole over there, there's got to be a cable in between. That's what you're looking for to try to avoid those obstacles.
Yeah, and all roads have power lines, 100% of them. So we stay away from those, look for the poles, and that's pretty intense, man. And what we wind up dealing with is kind of the poles that you can't see, or maybe where someone strung something from a house to a tree, and it's a large enough distance where an LZ has been chosen there. So yeah, that's one of the ways we get in trouble, and we don't we're not going to be able to land and just push down on it. So our process is to slow down and maybe do extra recon and keep circling until we're all comfortable that there's nothing there. But it's a different scenario. Like you guys had to get in there quickly, so different scenario.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like looking back, was it the right call? I think so, because it worked out. But 24-year-old me, I think, was a lot more adventurous than 44-year-old me. So I have some doubts about it looking now, but it worked out in the end. Now, with regards to your line of work, your aircraft is probably not that heavy. It's probably affected, I imagine, a lot more than heavy aircraft by wind, weather. Same what you were saying about the weight of the patient. I mean, if you have what's the difference between a 150-pound patient versus a 350-pound patient?
Well, the pilot will tell you a whole lot.
Yeah.
For us, 150, we do that on the regular, and we've transported 400-pound patients. Because a lot of our missions, the transport leg may only be 30 minutes. A lot of the times we can make the fuel happen for that. But when we get to that size patient, 350 and above, for the specific airframe that we're in, it's a rear loading ship, and there's an electronics avionics panel towards the back where we actually load the patient. It creates a tunnel. So there's a physical barrier of a height restriction that we have, that most people that are plus 350, we cannot load them into our ship because they're just too big. There's some that are different. If you get the 6'5" person, we can probably get that 350, 6'5" person. But when you get the 5'2", 350 person, that one doesn't ship.
So we spent almost the entire time talking about helicopter geek stuff, which is great. I like it. Can you, and you don't need to talk about specific stories if you don't want to, but can you just kind of walk us through your skill set and like what the average calls kind of look like for you, like what you can do, what you typically see, that sort of stuff?
I mean, it's all over the place. Your standard ambulance, when you call 911, can do a number of things. They can support you for a sudden cardiac arrest. They have medications. They can intubate you, so they can put a tube down your throat to help breathe for you. They may have IV pumps and some other medications. They can defibrillate your heart. They have a number of things that they can do to support care until you get to the hospital. And that's kind of your advanced life support paramedic type ambulance. And I'm sure I'm forgetting some things. But when you get into the critical care side, the helicopter EMS transport, there's some other options that we can do. Mechanical ventilation. So we can be a little bit more specific and a little bit more supportive of the needs of a patient who has lung injury or is not breathing on their own. We have a little bit more of a bag of tricks with medications that we can give. We can, instead of just intubating a patient, we can electively take their airway. So maybe a patient that has been in a car wreck who's not breathing well, and we're not going to be able to continue to support them, or they're not going to be able to support their ventilations on their own. We would proactively take that airway and intubate them. It's a higher level skill set. Medications and infusions. It's kind of a general ICU stuff that you would take care of. And we also can do some of the higher level things like Eric referenced ECMO. We don't actually do the ECMO side of the transport, but we can move that patient along with a specialist that would go with us. And some of your more invasive things, balloon pumps to support someone who's having some heart failure and other cardiac issues. So we kind of go beyond that of the regular 911 medic, and that's gets into the realm of the ICU level care, which is kind of how our staffing dynamic works well, because you have a paramedic with a lot of street experience, and you have an ICU trained nurse with a lot of ICU and ER experience that's taking care of these patients for 12 hours at a time for 4 days a week for weeks on end. So they're very comfortable with that subset of patients. So that melding of the group together works really well to handle those.
One of you guys go. I'm going to nerd out again.
Ryan, go for it.
I don't know. I'm just listening right now. I don't know. This isn't my wheelhouse. I'm just kind of here for the ride, you know.
Ryan, Frank, you get one more nerd question.
Oh no, you can't stop me one. You can't stop me one. Don't put those kind of chains on me.
Well, I'll tell you this. This has nothing to do with you, but you're both doctors. I get migraines, right? I've got them ever since I was a kid. Last week, I had a migraine for about almost 70 hours.
Oh,
I had no idea there was medication for migraines now, except for over-the-counter stuff. I've never had a doctor mention it. I've never had a doctor mention it. And my mom was like, "You have medication, right?" And I said, "No." And then I just...
Jesus.
Yeah.
There's so many options.
I had no idea. It sounds like the nasal one is probably great, right?
Yeah, you can definitely do that. There's a newer one called Nurtec that has a lot less side effects to it. That might be one you want to look into. Becca, my wife, and my kids unfortunately get headaches and migraines, and like Nurtec has been absolutely game changing for my wife and some of my friends and colleagues as well that get migraines. You don't get half the side effects that you do with a lot of the other ones. That's kind of the downside to a lot of the migraine meds is they just like knock you the F out.
Okay. That's good to know, Nurtec. I have an appointment on Thursday. So very good.
Good. I'm glad. Man, nail biter. I know some of the listeners were like, we haven't heard about your lipids in a while. How are your lipids doing?
Fantastic. No, but I mean, dude, maybe there's a listener who with bad migraines who had no idea there was medication aside from Excedrin, which really doesn't do anything for me, at least.
You're not wrong. We had a listener actually comment on Adrian's shoulder issue. He had some chiropractic advice for his shoulder issues, so hopefully we'll take that up. I'll we'll touch base on that offline. Yeah.
I like how this is an outlet to reach out and get feedback on your ailments.
Yeah.
Man, I'm in heaven. We're talking aviation and free medical advice. This is I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a little bit about kind of the heavier side of it, because in Eric's episode, Eric Shaw's episode, talking about being an EMT, definitely some heavy days, some hard cases you have to take home, and you're supposed to brush it off and go back to the next day and do something else. I guess from a flight medic point of view, where you had to make the hard call that we can't land, we aren't the ones to help you, and you knew kind of the ramifications that could come from making that call.
I haven't been in a position where we were so far into the event where we said we can't land. I've been in a few instances where we had to land short because of changes in weather. But at that point we had already made it to the patient and we had to drop back and go by ground, which isn't ideal, but that sort of thing happens. What happens more than that is when you get to an outlier hospital and you realize that we can't transport the patient. And it's not always size. It's not always acuity. It is acuity, but it's scenarios where and this one's happened recently where. And this is a failure of healthcare. And you're kind of in my opinions world now. We do a terrible job in general about speaking honestly with the family. So in that patient that's so sick that needs to move, unfortunately, our crews have shown up to the bedside and been greeted with a patient that's extremely sick. The outlook is not going to be positive, no matter if they go with or not. And no one's really talked to the family, and it's not what the family wants, but no one has sat down and said, here's what we can do. Here's what it looks like. And it may not change anything except make you have to drive hours away to go see your loved one. So that's one of the areas that's kind of tough, that we wind up sometimes having to step in and pull families aside and pull staff aside and say, for lack of, it sounds pretty crude, but say, what are we doing here? Should we actually be doing this when we know that the outcome is not going to be positive? The services that you're looking for aren't going to happen. And there's ways to mitigate it. We get the receiving staff involved as well, but some of these things could be stopped earlier if we had honest conversations sooner with the families and with the patients. So those are pretty tough. For the scene flights where we're in an unimprovised area, where we're landing in a field or a road or something like that, I haven't been in a scenario where we've had to wave off completely and not be able to do it. We've had EMS wave us off because maybe the patient has actually is with it enough and said, I'm not getting on a helicopter, or they've deteriorated to the point where we cannot do the transport before we ever arrive on scene. But typically we don't get into a scenario where we get that far into the scenario where we don't have the ability to come up with a solution for landing. We can usually make that happen. We may have to change our location.
I think that's really fascinating what you said earlier, that you get the heading and the distance, then you make that call first, then you're informed about what the case is. And that's by design. So is the thinking because of the psyche of don't make the call part of don't make the type of trauma you're treating part of the decision to come?
Yeah, I mean, because when you're in the industry, you want to help, right? You want to do the right thing. You want to help people out. And our pilots are not medically trained. They do not do any of the medical side, none of it, which is why we start with kind of an objective conversation. So our dispatch centers will only transmit to us very basic information. Hey, there is a request in this area, heading and distance. Can you do it? That way that the pilot who doesn't have the medical training doesn't have to hear, oh, it's a 3-year-old trapped under a car. Well, they might try a little harder and push limits in that scenario, which is not safe. So to try and eliminate that decision making, and the three of us as a crew can all come to an agreement and say, yeah, weather looks good. I think we can do this. Here's the plan. This is what we're going to do. We accept the mission, and then we get the details so we can plan for it en route.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And do you get regular safety training where you have to like routine qualifications year after year to stay current and specific to aviation?
We do. So we have a slew of medical side stuff that we have to keep up, obviously, but the aviation stuff goes on as well. So typically on any of our shifts, we do some sort of training. There's times in flight we'll review things if we're on what they'll call a dead leg, which is just maybe we're flying back to base after the patient's dropped off. So we'll have some conversations about, the pilot saying, hey, if I have to set down here, where would you point me to? Just to try and for the medical crews to learn more and be better prepared for picking out an LZ in an emergency scenario, things like that. And we have standardized training that we have to do for the vendor that actually owns the aircraft. There's legal things that we have to do, and keeping up with, NVG training and staying current on the aircraft, which is a review of systems that we should already know just as crew members. But yes, we do safety training throughout the year. We'll do dunker training for if we have to land in the water and escape the aircraft. Yeah, the short answer is yes.
Let's talk about the dunker training for a second.
It's very cool.
Now, does your dunker go upside down?
I've done a few of them, and from varying ranges, from ones that were basically a plastic seat, if you can imagine a plastic chair built in like a PVC cage. I've done ones like that all the way up to small aircraft that were, gutted. It's just the seats and the center portion of the aircraft that were put on floats and would flip over. So there's a couple of ways to do it, but the premise is the same. Any of our ships, if they go in the water, if we had to ditch in the water, the aircraft is going to turn over. So we learn how to get out underwater upside down.
That is absolutely frightening.
Yeah. There's a scene in The Perfect Storm with George Clooney and Mark Wahlberg or whatever. There's a scene in there where that rescue helicopter goes down and the crew has to get out. It is super accurate. And I think I saw that maybe a few months after I went through Pensacola and the Dunker and all that. And it got my heart pumping, man, because that is a scary way to go. And everybody knows, every Marine knows somebody that, went in the water and that didn't make it out or whatever.
Yeah, it's something that we would, in fact, we were talking about it today, actually. Just the discussion of whenever we go over large bodies of water, where your mindset needs to be. And it needs to be, kind of reviewing in your head what your plan is. If we had to set down, what would you do? And it's just little stuff, reference points, how you would evade, how you get out of your straps, things like that, where you'd rendezvous, how you'd signal for help. It's just that repetition like you've done in the military over and over and over again. So it just becomes second nature.
That's what we do if we find out there's like a bachelorette party in the crowd.
The same thing.
We have to really prep for it, think about where they are, who's around them. Get staff ready. Just know how we're going to handle it before it gets too dirty. Too dangerous.
So keeping with the spirit of our show, and just that this has so much parallels with mine, for me, with the long-term career in medicine, the stress of the EMS stuff started to get to me, and I pivoted away from that. You've doubled down. You've just dug just gone further in, and it's something you said earlier too about some of the staffing choices for a flight medic of just like stability and consistency. How would you describe how has this affected you as far as your mental health, as far as like long-term stress management? Like, can you tell me more about that with this now 20 plus year career in EMS and to the level you've reached now?
Well, I wasn't smart enough to go to doctor school, so that option wasn't there. But I kind of fell into it. I mean, I was in the fire department, and that was kind of where I was going to stay. I actually left one department. I tried nursing school. That programming didn't take. Bumped around, did some other jobs, went back to another fire department. That's where I was really going to stay. And the opportunity for flight just kind of came up. But, the stuff that you see, you mentioned it with your training. It's not just on the flight side. I mean, even the fire side has its issues. I mean, for instance, when I was a rookie fireman, like one of the big things is like getting your first fire, right? That's a big deal. Like it might be stakes at the end of this. It's your rookie year. Your first year or two in the firehouse, you're riding backwards on the engine. Your job is to basically get the hose, put the fire out, right? So you train for this, you do all these things, and you finally get your first fire. You put the fire out, all's good. Well, my first fire was a carload of children, so I didn't get to have that experience. So things just kind of built from there. And I didn't handle some of these things well, to kind of talk about, how you went through it. And some of these things I totally did the guy thing. And I drank and didn't admit that I was drinking because of that. And I packaged it away and I didn't think about it anymore. And then at some point, things just started coming out. You get exposed to a lot of stress. And, just on the 911 side, I've got gobs of stories we could go through, but all those things build over time. And then you step into a scenario like getting an aviation job, doing the flight medic type deal, and the stress just goes up. So maybe it's not all the bad things that you see. Maybe it's getting used to walking into an ER and all the staff leaves. So the sickest patient at the hospital that we're going to fly out, all the staff leaves. That's common. So, or you get staff that maybe they don't have a lot of experience in this and they don't know what to do. So here you and your partner have to work with this sick patient and talk this sending facility through what to do, which sometimes includes the doctors. These are the little stresses that just add up over time, on top of the acute big ones, like you were talking about, the single episodes, the family that's broken up because they have to make this decision about what to do with their loved one, or the pediatric one. The kids ones always get to you, especially as a parent. Once you're a parent, not that those that don't have kids that it doesn't affect them, but it affects you differently because you start thinking about your own children. So it's all those things add up. And I would say don't do what I did, which is drink a lot and ignore it. One thing that's happened in the field, EMS, helicopter 911, healthcare in general, is the discussion of mental health. And I don't know how much you've heard about this, Eric. At least in my career, I've seen it go from, we don't talk about anything. If it hurt you, you shut up. You don't talk about it, because if you talk about it and it bothers you, then it means you can't handle it and you shouldn't be here. To now where we're finally accepting these things, we're having conversations, and there's starting to be resources for providers to use. The conversation's more open now. People are more receptive to know that, hey man, it's different. And I'm curious, Ryan, what your thought is. When you're in the military, you're there for, if you sign up for 4 or 6 year, 8 years, it's an acute period of time. After that, you're out. It doesn't lessen the experience. If anything, it might make it worse, because you have these exposures that are in a short period of time, where pre-hospital, fire, police, EMS, any of the first responders, this could be over a 20, 30-year career where every other day you're exposed over and over and over again. And I don't think we know enough about what that does to humans to fully know how to help, but at least we're talking about it.
It makes you want to drink a lot. That's what it does.
Yeah, I'm proof of that. Sure.
I mean, that's not just you. That's kind of the medical culture. At least it was when we came up through it, where I remember lieutenants and people saying, "Oh, that was a stressful one. Let's go debrief." And it was kind of a big joke of like, no one was going to do that. We were all going to go to the bar afterwards.
Yeah.
And that's just how you dealt with it. Particularly like the ER culture and EMS culture, much more so.
The great idea at that time was we would all get together and do a debrief as a team. And unfortunately, that was looked at as a forced thing. You had to go to it. Your employer would say, you're going to this with the whole team. And we've learned that that's not helpful either, that people have certain ways of digesting this and they have to do what's helpful to them. So forcing someone to go to a large debrief session is not always the answer. I don't know if we have all the answers yet, but we're at least acknowledging that people are processing differently.
Can I say one thing? Last week, when I'm staying with my dad and stepmom in Roanoke, they watch nothing but network dramas, okay? Every show is an emergency services procedural. Just here's how they do it in Chicago. Here's how it is in fucking Oahu. Here, just nonstop. And you know what? None about helicopter doctors. Like, that seems like a much more interesting show.
That's
well, I'm not a doctor, so sorry.
Well, helicopter EMTs.
Relative to us, you're a doctor.
Yeah.
That's a great show. Write that script, Ryan.
I'm not doing it. I don't want to do a fucking procedural.
Oh yeah, man. Airwolf, but medical.
Yeah.
There you go.
It writes itself. If you don't know what Airwolf is, then you are a child. You are a very little dumb child. Well, Eric, I have about 20 more questions for you that will completely lose the audience. So before I get into that, I want to thank you for joining us and sharing this stuff with me. I had no idea. I thought I knew because pilot friends of mine were, medevac pilots, but I had no idea about some of the stuff you were sharing, and I'm sure a lot of our audience didn't either. So thank you very much for taking time and sharing those stories with us today.
Thanks for the invite.
Before we go, anything to plug, Ryan Connor?
Recording 2 specials, November 22nd and 23rd in Chicago. Plus, touring schedule, books and stuff on RyanConnorComedy.com.
And check out Connor v. Cobb and do more rank thems at the end of that.
I know, I forget. I always forget to do it.
I miss the rank thems.
All right, I'll do that.
Not appropriate for this show, but check
Probably
out
not.
Connor v. Cobb. I would kind of change the atmosphere a little bit. But I think that's going to do it for this one, and we'll see everybody next time. Music for Baggage provided by Quincy Ledbetter. You can find his stuff at qledbetter.com. Graphics provided by Megan Weaver. You can find her at meganweaverart.com. Special thanks to our premium members for their support. You can become a premium member by clicking subscribe in your Apple Podcast app or by visiting thebaggagepodcast.com/support to sign up or to gift a membership to someone. A percentage of all proceeds go to charity. If you have any questions, comments, or a good story to share, please email us at thebaggagepodcast@gmail.com.